Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, Metro columnist, and I'm joined by
business editor and columnist Greg Jefferson,
investigative reporter Brian Chasnoff.
We are 4 weeks away from the beginning of early voting in Texas, and within Bexar County, we've had a little bit of conflict over how the process is going to work. Obviously, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, people are worried about how to make the voting process safe and to avoid the spread of COVID-19. And County Commissioner Justin Rodriguez has, over the past couple of months, been working on different ideas to basically expand the number of locations, expand the times in which people can vote, and also to make mail voting easier. And on August 14th, the Commissioner's Court passed a resolution which had some of his proposals. Since then, it's become obvious that there is some conflict between Justin Rodriguez and Elections Administrator Jackie Callanan over some of these ideas. And just to kind of like break down what he's been wanting to do, he wanted to create 4 mega centers for early voting across the county, and that looks like it's going to happen. One of them is the AT&T Center. He wanted to also have at least one of those mega centers be available for 24-hour voting at least one day a week for early voting. Jackie Callanan has really objected to that, saying that to just have one election site open like round the clock, if a problem comes up and there's no one else in the the elections department who's available, that's going to be a problem. He also wanted to have drop-off locations across the county for mail voting, because some people are worried about their ballots arriving on time and worried about the postal system. Jackie Callanan has really objected to that proposal because we have one elections office. If we look at state election law, when it comes to dropping off ballots, we have one elections office and people would have to drop it off there. He has suggested creating satellite offices, just using sort of buildings around the county that could be converted into satellite elections offices. Jackie Callanan has said if they're not fully functioning elections offices, it's not going to work, and she has had a real problem with that. One thing that he suggested that looks like it's going to happen is mailing out ballots or ballot applications for everyone 65 or over, because if you're 65 or over, you automatically qualify to vote by mail if you want to. And so the county is sending all that out with postage provided. So some of these ideas that he's talked about are going to happen. Some are not, but there's kind of this kind of a conflict, I think, between someone who's trying to kind of think outside the box, and then you have an elections administrator who's kind of looking at the letter of the law. I mean, Greg, you obviously know both of these people really well. What do you think?
Yeah, Jackie Callanan is the box. So I mean, that's right. It's easy to forget how badly San Antonio elections went before she came in, which was in the early 2000s. We'd routinely have really late results and just generally poorly run elections, and she really whipped the office into shape. I mean, I think anybody looking at it objectively would say, yeah, I mean, it's really the elections department, the county elections department has really done well under her. And she's a very by the book kind of administrator. So I think, this maybe this collision with Justin Rodriguez, in some ways was inevitable. I mean, she's had a lot of success over a long period of time, and she's used to doing things the way she's used to doing them. And she's got the law on her side. She knows election law very well. Justin Rodriguez, he's still relatively new to Commissioner's Court. He replaced Paul Elizondo, who'd been on since the 80s. And, frankly, near the end of his time on Commissioner's Court, he wasn't, he hadn't really made his name in voter engagement.
That's fair to say.
Yeah, he didn't do a lot of outreach, and access to balloting wasn't his issue. For Justin, it is. And, he's like Rodriguez, he's relatively young. He's in his first term and he wants to make a name for himself in part. And, increasing access to the ballot is a really good way to do it. I mean, that's, it gets to the core of our democracy. So, it makes sense that he's made this an issue, particularly this year where you've got, a president who is doing everything he can to undermine mail-in balloting. To offset that at the local level seems like, a pretty honorable mission.
Yeah.
And he's taken it up. But he's, in doing that, he's come into conflict with Jackie. So.
Right. And I think she has argued that, even though we haven't dealt with COVID-19 before, she has dealt with huge numbers of early voters and mail voters, and that her office is equipped to deal with it. I mean, one of the things that's interesting to me about this is, up to this point, the criticism Jackie has received, and I think anybody in her position is going to receive criticism from time to time, but a lot of it had been from sort of the Cynthia Brem wing of the Republican Party. Basically Cynthia Brem, until recently the Republican Party chair for Bexar County, would just go on these tirades, basically saying that Jackie and her elections workers were not, that they were there was some fraud happening, or that ballots were being tampered with, and all these things, which I don't think there was any evidence of that at all. But she was constantly throwing that out, and even threatened to pull out of the joint primary earlier this year until she was kind of talked into to staying in that. And so Jackie had received a lot of that. Now she's had some conflict with a Democrat, Justin Rodriguez, and also, Tommy Calvert, county commissioner, has he's been critical recently. He's raised some questions about the process. He's making a big issue now about wanting to track the mail ballots so that people know if their ballots have been received and if they're being counted. And he hasn't been real satisfied with the response he's gotten on that. So I don't know if it's a reflection of the fact it says that you're doing a good job if you're getting criticism from both parties. I don't know
maybe. What also makes me wonder, I mean, my impression of what Rodriguez did, over the summer was, he took kind of a bunch of ideas for expanding access to the ballot, and he just kind of threw it against the wall. I don't know how much research he actually did. I mean, did he talk with the county department, elections department? Did he check state law to find out whether, Dropbox balloting would be legal or not?
And also,
it's not. So
after he got the feedback from Jackie, did he accept that feedback and say, okay, you would know better than I would? Or is there still a conflict?
Yeah, well, these are good questions. Like there were some things that he kind of threw out as suggestions in which he asked for legal guidance. There were a couple of things that he asked Joe Gonzalez, the district attorney, to kind of clear up for him. One of them was he wanted to have expand curbside voting, which I believe is really only available to people with disabilities who are. He wanted to make that more accessible. And found that was going to be a problem. I think Joe Gonzalez looked into that, and he also, when we talked about the drop off locations, he actually wanted to see if we could have drop boxes around the county, and that is just something that Joe Gonzalez, in conferring with people at the Secretary of State's office, found that just wasn't going to be possible at all. You can't do that, and so there were some things like that he did kind of throw against the wall and say, just let me know, is this a possibility or not? I think he's been clear that because Jackie said some of his ideas were against the law, and I think he's been sensitive to that, and I think he feels that some of these things, like the drop boxes, these were things that he basically wanted to find out will this work or not, but that he was not attached to the idea of drop boxes per se. But he just wanted to have locations where people could at least drop them off in some way. So yeah.
I mean, there's clearly a political dimension to this too. I mean, he did take to Twitter
that is true.
To complain about his treatment at the hands of Jackie Callanan. I mean, he didn't name her in the tweet, but said, he'd been called a meddler and
right.
And I think he included his tagline was something like "Change is hard, man."
That's right. That's right.
So I mean, he's a sharp enough young politician to get that. Look, you need, to really kind of sharpen your message, you need opposition. And, Jackie's kind of that opposition right now.
It also sounds like he's not accepting that some of his ideas are illegal.
That's right. That's right. And so, like I said, I think that the most positive reading of this is that we will have these mega centers around the county, and we are going to have mail ballots, ballot applications sent to everyone 65 or over, which I think will make that easier for people. Hopefully, the thing that I keep thinking, we've talked a little bit about this, is I just feel like the message should be, regardless of what party you support, the message should be for people to vote as early as possible. If they want to vote by mail, particularly, get a ballot application as soon as you can and get the ballot out as early as possible, because we do have some uncertainty about how ballots are going to be delivered, and if there are going to be problems with individual ballots. I think the earlier you have them out, the better. One of the things I really dread is this idea that we're going to have so many outstanding ballots throughout the country this year. We've always had, many, but I think that it's going to be on a scale that we've never seen before. And so there are going to be a lot of interpretations on election night of what's happening in the election that we may see something else happen over the few days after that. And the way that's going to be very traumatic, I think, because there's going to be a lot of rhetoric flying around. And I just think the more ballots that are counted by election day, the better. I don't know.
Yeah, it's making for a really, it was always going to be a really ugly election night. And you're right. This is going to compound the problem. Personally, I'm planning on going into a medically induced coma for about a week before and after the election. I just,
Yeah, no, I think that's actually a really smart move. I think because otherwise, I think we'll all go crazy otherwise. We're going to take a little break and we will be back in a minute.
Hello and welcome to the Express Briefing presented by the San Antonio Express News. My name is Luis Vasquez and I'll be your host every weekday morning to bring you the top headlines you need to know to start your day in about 10 minutes or less. You can listen for free at expressnews.com, on your Apple Podcast app, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
So we're back and wanted to talk a little bit to Brian about a story that he had over the weekend. And this was basically a follow-up to the incident that happened on August 25th when a man named Damian Daniels was killed at his home after there had been, I think, 4 calls from family members, I think one from him, because he was going through mental distress and there were concerns about him and his mental state. And sheriff's deputies went to his home. He had a pistol under his shirt. A conflict ensued, and he ended up getting killed. And I think there's been a lot of shock about that. And County Judge Nelson Wolff is saying this is something that should have never happened. And a lot of questions about why mental health resources were not utilized in the handling of that incident. And Brian, you wrote this weekend about how the San Antonio Police Department is kind of revising their approach to mental health incidents. What have they decided to do?
Yeah, so this was a special order that Police Chief William McManus put out a couple weeks ago. It was actually a week after Damian Daniels lost his life in that incident. And the basic idea is to slow down these responses to folks who are in a mental health crisis. The new rule is basically if there's a weapon involved, or if there's violence that has occurred, or a threat of violence that has occurred, then the responding officer needs to get a hold of a supervisor, and then the supervisor needs to determine whether this is actually, well, first of all, get a hold of a supervisor and also speak to someone at the scene who is not the mentally ill person to get a fuller understanding of what is happening.
That's a really important I think, provision there.
And then if it is determined that this is a mental health situation, then just take the time to actually tap some resources. I mean, just like the Bexar County Sheriff's Office, the San Antonio Police Department has a mental health team of officers who are, specially trained to deal with these situations. In the Daniels shooting, that mental health unit was not tapped. These were just patrol deputies who tried to detain Daniels and then unfortunately ended up shooting and killing him. One deputy in particular, actually. And I wrote another story. I don't know if you caught this one, but the deputy who actually shot Daniels, he was involved in an incident 10 years ago where he shot and killed another man. This was a man who was also having a mental health crisis. And it just seems like the new rule that the SAPD has instituted really would have applied to this shooting 10 years ago, because in a nutshell, what happened was the single deputy pulled up in his car and immediately initiated contact with the man who was in mental distress, who had a knife. There's a dispute whether he had it in his hand or his back pocket, but he had a knife, and the deputy ended up shooting and killing him because he was walking toward him. And it just seems that these measures that SAPD has now put in place, could have rectified that situation where the deputy would have slowed down. He would have called for backup. Would have tried to assess the situation more, because that situation 10 years ago, this man, he was not threatening anyone else at the time that the officer had pulled up, although he had threatened some family members before the officer pulled up. So
I'm trying to remember with the Daniels case, was there anybody else on the scene? In that case, would the deputies have been able to talk to anybody else? I mean, or was he was there by himself, wasn't he?
Yeah, well, there were. My understanding is he was at home by himself. Yeah, but this was the fourth call over a 24-hour span, and these were his relatives were calling for help. They had actually called the American Red Cross, and the Red Cross called the sheriff's office. But again, if you're aware that this is a mental health crisis, as those deputies should have been, then you tap resources that are available instead of rushing to detain someone.
Hey, Brian, in your reporting, I was curious about why the family called the Red Cross as opposed to the police. Was it that they were concerned that something like this could happen? Or
yes, that's what they said at the press conference they gave a couple weeks ago outside of the Bexar County Courthouse. Their lawyer was speaking for them, but Lee Merritt, the lawyer, said that's exactly why they called the American Red Cross, because of course Damian Daniels is Black, and there's a heightened awareness about these tragic outcomes that are happening over and over again with Black men being shot and killed by law enforcement.
After this happened, Sheriff Javier Salazar was pretty defiant in saying that he thinks that the deputies did handle this thing well. Has that anything changed with that? Is he still basically insisting that there was nothing that could have or should have been done differently?
Well, here's where I point out that the only source for the narrative that reporters have received thus far is from the sheriff himself. He has not released the basic incident report from the shooting. There's body camera footage that he could release that he has not released. Eventually he did release the names of the deputies involved, but I just think that there's a concerning lack of transparency right now. It's ridiculous that the sheriff's office hasn't even released the basic incident report, and their excuse for that is that it's under investigation and they're going to forward everything to the district attorney at some point. But transparency is sorely lacking right now.
Yeah, they need to put that out. Before we wrap things up, I wanted to talk a little bit about workforce development and the jobs market in San Antonio. And obviously, one of the big issues that's going to be on the ballot, and we've talked a lot about it here, is the workforce development proposition that Mayor Ron Nirenberg is pushing, which is going to be 4 years, $154 million in sales tax revenue, which to hopefully help create a better trained workforce in San Antonio. And Greg, last week you did an interview with Jenna Saucedo Herrera, who is the president and CEO of the Economic Development Foundation. And it was a really interesting interview. And, one of the things that you all talked about was the fact that San Antonio has a reputation as kind of a low wage city, and how she's approaching that, because there's kind of been, this has kind of been a problem for the city for years.
Oh, it has. And, historically, it had been a problem exacerbated by the Economic Development Foundation. I mean, the EDF was founded in 1975. Mm-hmm. And from its inception, it sold the city as a place where, the cost of living is low. There are few, if any, labor unions, and, labor can be had cheap. When that's your pitch to employers, I mean, you can imagine you're not going to get the best employers, right?
Right.
So the result had been a bunch of customer service centers, which is kind of the polite way of saying call centers. Like call centers at some point became a dirty word in economic development, and you'll never hear that from somebody like Jenna. But that's what they are. I mean, they're call centers. The pay's not great, and we've racked up a lot of them over the years. Mm-hmm. So Jenna Saucedo Herrera is kind of a point of departure. I mean, she was hired from CPS Energy about 4 years ago to run EDF. And her, part of the reason the foundation's executive committee hired her was because they recognized, I think, that the old way just wasn't working. We are, San Antonio remains, the poorest large city in the country. And if you're not working to get better paying jobs, you're kind of, you're doing a disservice to both, the larger community, but also to the business community. Yeah. So, she's kind of reoriented EDF to really target higher paying, higher skill jobs. And she's kind of, she's not put so much priority on call centers. I mean, they'll still work with call center operators, but it's not a priority for EDF. And executives who work for the foundation, they don't get much credit. They're not rewarded for bringing in a new call center. Not really. Not when it comes to their performance and bonuses.
One of the things I'll hear. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you. One of the comments that I tend to get from readers whenever I've written about the workforce development proposition is the people will say, you're going to train people to do all these jobs. Where are the jobs here in San Antonio for people? Where we have the service industry. Where right. we have a lot of tourism. We have certain things. Where are these jobs going to be? And I mean, and I think I would defer to you on this one. I mean, is the idea that if you create this trained workforce, they will come. That you will be able to. It's the field of dreams.
Damn it, Gilbert! I was hoping. Yeah, I hate that. Sorry, I hate the very idea of if you build it, they will come.
I know.
However,
edit that out?
in economic development. The fact of the matter is, and she actually pointed this out in my interview with her, that, companies, when they're looking to expand into a new city or to relocate, real estate and economic incentives, basically public giveaways, those used to be high on the list. Now, what's replaced them, those two items recently has been kind of quality of life, culture, and more importantly, the quality of the workforce. So right. Companies are working, they're looking around for better educated workforce. And, economic development experts in San Antonio finally come around to the idea that, look, if you want to attract better paying jobs, you need a better educated workforce. And that kind of goes hand in glove with what Nuremberg is trying to do with this workforce training program that was really, unfortunately, it took a pandemic to bring it about.
Yeah.
But at least, however it started, at least it's going. And, there is a strategy to, if voters agree, to keep it going with a sales tax revenue. The idea is, if, you take workers who are now unemployed, you train them for jobs that actually, these jobs actually do exist in San Antonio right now. They're in healthcare, they're in cybersecurity, and to a lesser degree, IT. You train them up, you find them jobs in those industries, and other cybersecurity and IT companies will take notice of that. And if there's an ongoing training program, it could be that you find large companies that maybe before hadn't really considered San Antonio. Maybe they're thinking about it now, just because you've demonstrated a commitment to train up workers to do the jobs that you have.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to wrap things up on that note. Thank you all so much for listening. Hope everybody's well out there, and we'll be back next week. Take care.